as Kerry just summarised, it's been, last 6 months has been really, really interesting, in the global context of the world, but also in Australia. So this has spurred me to wanting to convey to people about what's happening, within the built environment, as the built environment is one of the, key, emitters of greenhouse gases and, waste and everything like that. And obviously we live in homes, we go to work in buildings, and, we have we want to be comfortable in these buildings, but we also need to make better buildings. And as well, not just for ourselves, but also for the surrounding environment and ecology. And if we're going to continue growing and everything like that, we need to make better buildings now. So this is why, I've kind of, leapt on the subject of a pathway towards net zero carbon homes, which is just part of the aspect of achieving carbon neutrality, but which I'll talk on now. So just a brief summary of what we're going to go over. The Climate and Biodiversity emergency, declaring a climate emergency, achieving carbon neutrality, breaking down carbon emissions, a pathway towards a net zero carbon home. So we're just going through explaining, understanding what all this is, and then how do we go about, look at a pathway towards a net zero carbon home. And then we're going to be looking at beyond net zero carbon and looking at regenerative design. So which is something I'm really, really pumped to talk about because it's a really cool thing. So as I said before, last 6 months, a lot of bad stuff happened. Not the funnest recap. So I'm going to, keep pushing forward. But the one thing, I suppose that we can, the one thing that has come out of all this, all this chaos and everything that's been happening, as sure that everybody in this room is well aware of, is the fact that we are getting action, and we're getting action from a ground-up approach. And so we're starting to, this movement, or this action, or or declaring of a climate emergency, is spurring this drive towards net zero carbon emissions and a drive towards a better environment. So it's really, really awesome. So 92 city councils across Australia have joined in declaring climate emergency. That's probably gone, statistics probably changed since I put this down. It goes up a little bit, every other week, which is really good. So pretty much all the state capitals have declared except for Brisbane and Perth. So, maybe somehow we can nudge them in the right direction. If anybody is, I doubt anybody's flown that far just to see me tonight, but if you are or know anybody from those states, just, get them to push other people in the right direction, that'd be great. So we've got, carbon neutral Adelaide, we've got Sydney, which is, said let's go, net zero emissions 2050, and then they just push that, right up to date, which is really, really awesome. And a lot of other, cities are going like 2050 is actually not good enough, let's do it now, or let's do it within the next year. Because that's the thing, we have the technology to do it now. We just need, the driver and the motivation. So, back one slide, going forward. So, along with councils, the people who design our built environment are architects and engineers. I mean, we definitely do have a lot of other disciplines and a lot of other, stakeholders within that process. But I suppose, from my world within the built environment, Australian architects and engineers are the key drivers and influencers, and what they choose to work on and what they choose to work on and what they choose to not work on. Really, what can you say? Just influences, influences design, influences companies, and drives. They're the key foundation to drive better buildings and a better built environment. So, like over 800 architecture firms and 160 engineering companies have, have joined in declaring climate emergency, and they're changing their work practices and their business practices, their work practices, and how they go about designing, how they go about, who they want to work with, what clients they want to work with, but also just about the information they want to give out. They're completely changing everything with the mindset of that as a climate emergency, and we need to, do better. The one way that they're doing this, and this is why I'm leading into it tonight, is by establishing regenerative design practices at the core focus, or at the core of their movement or their practices. They're also committing to becoming carbon neutral, which is really, really awesome. So again, those 800 architecture firms are all, you know, and engineering firms are a little bit slow. We're pushing them, but you know, the architecture firms are just absolutely spearheading it, going full throttle. But yeah, it's like, you know, 800 architecture firms are looking at becoming carbon neutral, and you know, and they're being forward, and they're, you know, being transparent about how they're doing that. And so, you know, they did this through like a little Instagram, you know, kind of, you know, just, you know, social media campaign where they're saying, you know, our country's burning, you know, we need action, we need to act now, that we're going to become carbon neutral in 2020, and then they're purchasing green power, you know, to offset their carbon emissions. And yeah, and then, you know, looking at how the other methods to do that. Once you've achieved carbon neutrality, which we'll be talking about tonight in your operations, how else can you reduce your carbon emissions? Or, you know, and that's through your embodied energy and other, and other aspects of your practices. Okay, so before we go on down the road of what is, you know, or down the road of, you know, telling you about how to design your home to be carbon neutral, I think it's just really important first that we break down carbon neutrality to understand what we're talking about tonight. So when we're breaking down carbon emissions, it's just, yeah, there's a lot to unpack. It's a big umbrella. So total carbon, embodied carbon, operational carbon. Operational carbon is obviously what I'm, you know, yeah, operational carbon is, you know, things that are produced from my actions, or, you know, like this, we're in this building right now, and we're using, you know, energy that's got a bit of, you know, that's a bit carbon-based, a little bit renewables-based, but mostly carbon-based, you know, electricity from the grid. But, you know, we also drive cars, we also, you know, we also like to fly and go on trips and stuff like that. And then we have embodied energy. So embodied energy is obviously what makes up the things around us, and the energy that goes into making up those things. So, you know, obviously within buildings, we're talking about construction, and the embodied energy of construction, and materials. And so this is another factor that, it's only in the last probably about, you know, 6 months, or maybe not, like about 4 months, recognizing more efficient methods of recognizing embodied energy within the built environment, how to calculate it, you know, is only just, you know, just come to fruition. So it is a really complicated process when you're designing a building to minimize your embodied carbon, or to calculate that. So it is getting there, but, you know, operational energy is a lot easier. It's a lot easier to quantify. So yeah, so those are under the umbrella construction and materials under embodied energy, and then with energy, transport and waste under operational energy. Minimizing those things, or understanding how you can minimize those things, you know, is how you can become carbon neutral. And then I'll break down the next one, but yeah, sorry, lead to the next slide. Don't want to get ahead of myself. So breaking down carbon emissions. So, and I apologize for this one. This is a little bit commercial based. Didn't have time to change this one. So again, this is looking at the different scopes. So, you know, you've got direct emissions, indirect emissions. So, you know, indirect emissions from, again, embodied energy, from the things that go to building your home. If you've got, you know, if you're looking at glazing or insulation, and looking at, you know, concrete or wood you know, and all these other materials, they have different amounts of energy of going into producing those materials. And so we need to get away from, you know, materials that are produced with a lot of energy, and go, you know, try to look at, you know, other items and stuff like that, you know, like concrete, you know, like hempcrete. I think we've had building design Dick Clark talk about hempcrete in here before, which is really, really good. And it's it's a concrete that has a lower embodied, you know, energy than normal concrete. But also looking at, you know, the rise of using timber, so timber in houses, but timber in tall buildings as well, lower embodied carbon than steel. And yeah, so that's how we're looking at those, you know, those embodied energies. But tonight, we're just going to be looking at the scope 2, which is the indirect emissions that, you know, come from our grid, and how we can minimize, you know, our energy consumption from the grid, you know, to obviously become net zero carbon. But also then we're going to look past that and obviously look at how we can, you know, generate our own electricity as well. And then through regenerative design, we're going to look at, you know, what happens, you know, once you've achieved carbon neutrality, what's beyond that. So how can we achieve net zero carbon emissions? So the first thing with achieving net zero carbon emissions is measuring, and then we want to measure, we want to reduce, we want to offset. So we need to understand what it is that or the quantity that we want to reduce our emissions to. So because when we need to understand how to measure and quantify our electricity so we can reduce it. And then once we've got it down to that level, or realistic level, we then will look at offsetting it. So some buildings like the Sustainable Building Research Centre can produce all of its own electricity on site, so it doesn't need to offset. But if you've got a little home, that doesn't have much space for solar PV on the roof, and you've got a large tree, or you're behind towards Mount Kira or something like that, and you've got a lot of overshadowing, you might have to offset. It's also, when we look at renting as well, or renters, the other way that we can become carbon neutral is through offsetting. So once we understand how we go about reducing our emissions, like in a broad scope, we then need to understand what we can do within our home, from the perspective of, somebody looking at building a new development, somebody that's retrofitting, and then a renter. So this pyramid right here, this is the overarching scheme for all the things that you need to consider when you're building a home, to make it, not just, a net zero carbon home or an energy efficient home, but just make it a comfortable home as well. So the blue items, obviously, we're looking at passive design. And we want to have a passive home, or we want to have a home with natural ventilation. And in summer we can open the windows, but it's still letting a nice cool breeze in. And in summer, we don't want to, winter, we don't want to have to come home to a cold, drafty house that we have to, ramp up the heating for. We want to have a home that is able to, insulate and equalize its temperature itself. And then we looking at the core foundation of that when you're building a new home is the site. So if you have the opportunity, it's very rare that some people have the opportunity to build or to optimize their site. But obviously understanding how you want to position your home, utilising the shape and orientation of the site to facilitate passive cooling and heating. So that's obviously trying to, looking at ways to have your, you've normally your living spaces more to the north, and your utilities to the east and west, and then some, their bedrooms to the south. So that way you're kind of positioning your rooms and how they're occupied and their uses towards the areas that are going to have heat gains or cooling, or cooling losses and those kind of things. So if you have the opportunity to do that. But then we look at building form. So building form is obviously the shape of the house and how we want to construct and design our home. So the main thing is obviously the easiest one here is you reduce window sizes on east and west facades straight off the bat and everything. Again, if you have the ability to optimize your site, you can plan your home so you don't have, so you can reduce it, so you don't have those main living areas on the east and west, so you can reduce those window sizes. So you're not letting those, when the sun rises in the east and sets in the west, you're not getting those intense solar radiation hitting on those facades. And the other one is increase the size of your windows on your north and south facades. So you're getting that natural light coming in. It's not direct, sunlight, but it's that nice ambient light coming in as well. So very loosely, those are the two, from a ground up approach. Those are the two things that you can do that have the largest impact on the energy of your home and everything like that. So that's what's the base of the pyramid. After that, and this is when we get into people who are looking to retrofit and want to retrofit, is the building envelope. So what you want to put in your walls, or what kind of material you want in your walls, or the construction to be made out of. What glazing do you want on your windows and everything like that. So looking at these different aspects that you want to change without changing the core structure, and the form of the house. So straight after that, I say this, anybody in Australia, Melbourne might be a bit different, or there's cooler climates. Double glazed windows. A lot of builders, a lot of people will tell you that or still think of double glazed windows as a U kind of thing. It's you're going above and beyond if you have double glazed windows, and they should have been stock standard like about 5 years ago. Anybody building or anything within our climate here in Wollongong, Sydney, just should have been commonplace. Double glazed windows off the bat. If we're having increased temperatures, increased heat waves, you need to stop that 35 to 40 degree weather from creeping inside your home. But we don't want to live in an esky. We don't want to live in an insulated box. We want to have windows. So that's why you've got to have double glazed windows. And then the other one, increased insulation as well. So our construction codes stipulate a certain insulation requirement. And they're only in the latest code, NCC 2019, it's only just gotten to the point where it's actually a good solution. It's not too bad. Before that, it was very loose with how you put your insulation in your walls. The depth of that insulation and the regulation of that. And so that's why we have a lot of homes that look good and look modern and everything like that, but they're still poor performing. They still allow a lot of heat loss and a lot of cooling loss as well, and everything like that. So we've got to have increased insulation in our walls and in our roof, and everything like that. So then if we are air conditioning in summer, we can keep that cool air in, and in winter we can keep that hot, that warm air in as well. But again, if you reach, you meet the passive design criterias and everything like that, you're going to have that comfortable home. You're going to come in and you're going to feel that ambient temperature at all times of year. So I'm going to share around now, just some double glazed samples. So the reason why I brought these along is to get people to understand, just you are retrofitting or you are building, what you're actually putting into your windows. But one thing I wanted to show people is this as well, is that the different colours, which is called VLT percentage, which is the visible light transmittance. So this is showing the two numbers on here are the performance properties of this window. So you've got your VLT, which is the amount of natural light that's letting in. And then you've got your SHGC, or your solar heat gain coefficient, which is the amount of solar radiation it's letting in. So when you're looking out the window, and say if you do have a home and you are retrofitting and you do have an east or west facing window, but you want to have a nice view because you've got a nice decking, or you're on your escarpment, you can see the ocean, but you want that natural light, but you don't want the heat. That's when you've got to look at a high VLT or mid-range VLT and a low SHGC. The lower that SHGC, the more solar radiation, the more heat you're blocking from the sun. So the lower you get that, the better. But it's a bit of a trade-off, because the lower that number is, the harder it is to get that VLT to be higher. So it's a bit of a trade-off. But the reason why I brought these along is to show people that you can get these performance properties, and it is quite common. But also they're really cool. They're very heavy. I lugged these all the way from work, and I was trying to get here a bit earlier, and I didn't get there because these just bogged me down. But before I get distracted with those as well, I'm going to show, this is a neat little one as well. I'm sorry that I don't have this in the size of those. This is a cool, interesting little piece of kit. This is a photovoltaic glass. So it's a solar panel in a glass casing. And I brought this along as well because this is something that in the next, it's being used now, mostly for people with a bit of money behind them, or looking at shopping centres and they've got large roof areas, skylights and things like that. But this will become in the next couple of years more affordable and more commonplace to use in your home as well. So again, if you do have those east and west facing windows, why not try to get a big bang for your buck and get a bit of energy out of them. So I've talked about glass for a little bit. It's worth talking about glass for a little bit because architects love it. It's all over our buildings. They want glass boxes. And the thing that we're struggling with now is that not the standard, not just the construction standard, but we want to go down net zero carbon path. We need to stop building glass boxes. I know, I feel like it's a bit of a cop-out really, but because it's just easy design feat. I hope there's no architects in this room. I'm not offending anybody right now who does love a glass box. But following that, once you've got those, the passive design features, those, blue boxes, done and dusted, you look at your building services. So that's your HVAC, so your heating and cooling. your lighting, your appliances, obviously your hot water heating as well. So they're the other big factors. Like your HVAC consumes approximately 40% of your building or your home's total energy requirement, your total energy. So if you can cut that down, you're making a big dent you're making a big dent in your energy consumption as well. But then again, if you tick those blue boxes, you might not need, air conditioning. You might not need heating, stuff like that. Especially in the Wollongong climate here, where we don't get awfully cold winters. We do get really hot, humid summers, though, which is a bit painful. But again, if you design well and you design for natural ventilation, you can get past that. The other thing as well, why I think is a really good important one, is lighting. So lighting, in here, for example, nice soft ambient lighting. Lighting is one that, we use everywhere, and if it's done well, we don't notice that it's there, it's because it's ambient. But it's a bit of a double whammy. If you have efficient lighting, not only are you reducing your direct energy consumption, but inefficient lighting gives off heat as well. And that's heat that's going to make you hot, and then you've got to click on the air conditioning. So efficient lighting is a bit of a double whammy in reducing your energy consumption. You're reducing your direct heat, but you're reducing your heat gain in the space as well. And the other one is obviously your hot water. Again, luckily here we don't get too cold, but looking at if you have instantaneous hot water electric, that's going to ramp up your energy consumption, electricity consumption. I'm not going to talk about gas because it's a little bit bit bad, but a lot of people say it uses less produces less carbon emission than coal, which it does. But so the main way for your hot water is obviously your solar hot water, but also if you can't have solar hot water, look at a heat pump, stuff like that as well, which that's another way of having an efficient hot water system. Once you've ticked all of those, and then we get to the level where I'm at as a renter, and you want to offset, I understand how you can offset your carbon emissions. That's when we look at, in a home as well, on-site renewable energy, solar panels, or purchasing carbon offsets. So if you're a renter like me, when you have, whether you're a tenant in a building and you want to get everybody else on board, or everybody else is kind of keen to have solar panels on the roof, you can, push or drive your landlord to do that for you. Whether that offsets the common facilities energy, in that building, so you might not be able to directly benefit from that solar PV. It might be to your, common facilities lighting, stuff like that in an apartment building. But at least at some level, it's kind of making a difference. But the other way you can do it is through carbon offsets. So carbon offsets, I feel like in the past, there's a couple of things that happened in the past with them being mismanaged, and it's giving carbon offsets a bad name. At the moment, currently, with the new government framework, the standard called Climate Active, you have, we can say approved or recognised carbon offsets. And the whole idea about them is that if I can't offset my carbon emissions here where I am, can I at least, spend a little bit of money, or is there some way that I can offset them over there? And that's through, reforestry, through those kind of aspects, or through facilitating, or you can say, not really investing, but you're putting money into renewable, energy, plants, like solar farms and everything like that. Your money's going to driving that infrastructure. So, and that's a bit of double whammy as well, because you're offsetting, so you're feeling good about yourself and reducing your emissions, but you're also investing in a greener grid, because the more that we do that, the more we offset where we can, the more that you're investing in that infrastructure, and the more that you're going to decarbonise the grid. Eventually, we have a decarbonised grid, we have a green grid. We don't need that top part, we don't need solar panels or anything like that. We're just carbon neutral just by connecting to the grid. If that grid did not have, carbon in it. So that's a pretty big overview. There's a lot more detail that you can go into that. But this is just a little bit more details what I was talking about before. So this is obviously specifying a little bit closer into new builds and retrofits. And I talked about this a little bit already. Improving the efficiency of your HVAC, reducing electrical requirements, utilising renewable energy sources, and reducing heating and cooling requirements. and everything like that. So, there's a couple of, got a bit of a breakdown of a couple of things that you can do in there. So, as a homeowner and a renter, if you've done all the above, all the other things, you're optimising your home the way you can. The way that you can, obviously, as we stated before, we can achieve carbon neutrality through minimising electricity consumption, advocating for installation of solar PV, etc. But the main thing that you can do, and people are understanding this, and more people, are driving this, is moving away from places where you put your money that support, coal-based infrastructure. So moving away from energy providers that support the fossil fuel industry. There's a couple of names there, dubbed the Dirty Three. And then, but moving, going to an energy provider that, acknowledges and supports climate change, and that, looks at, community energy programs, and looks at, investing in, has sustainable, carbon offsetting programs and things like that, like reforestry, and invest in solar farms and things like that. So the two main ones there are PowerShop and Innova Energy. So PowerShop's a bit of a bigger guy, New Zealand based. All their assets are hydroelectric dams and wind farms, and I think some solar in there as well. And then you've got Innova Energy, which is a bit of a smaller guy and really supports community renewable projects. So they're the two ones to go with if you want to hit these bigger companies in the pocket where where it hurts the most. The other one you can do, and I'm not an accountant, so I'm not going to tell you how to manage your money. But another way where you can hurt the big guys is moving your money to somebody that is more ethical and somebody that supports the climate change movement. And the biggest one is Bank Australia. So they're a really, really good guy in that space. And something that's I really wanted to elaborate on more, but I didn't for the sake of time, was the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. They've got had this huge investment to drive, to discount green home loans. So they're really trying to drive, that kind of, sustainable, energy efficient retrofitting in, home building as well, which is really good. So I've had a bit of a, overview, top-down or bottom-up approach of achieving carbon neutrality with your own home. I know there's probably, for some people, there's a lot more detail you can go into. I'd love to talk into more detail about insulation and shading, optimization, all these things as well, but maybe that's for another night. But one thing that it's really, really awesome to talk about, and I'm excited to talk about, is beyond net zero emissions and what we do past that. Because you'll be surprised that we're getting there already. I mean, how many people in this room, just with having solar panels on their roof already, don't have to pay electricity bill? So I've got my dad up there. I know he doesn't pay electricity bill, so he gets a bit of a bit of a benefit. So so a lot of people are already there, and we're going to get there. I think, hopefully, fingers crossed, a lot faster than we think we are currently. So once we get there, what do? And that's regenerative design. So regenerative design is, and this is part of the architects, as I said before, the architects and engineers declare movement. But ultimately, it's where the built environment will go towards, and it's the ultimate goal of the built environment. What happens past year, I don't know, but we've got to stop looking at net zero carbon as a huge thing, and it's fantastic and it's awesome. It's we're going to get there. We're getting there now. And stuff like that. So we need to understand what's happening beyond that, so we can get to that stage faster as well. So regenerative design is, regenerative thinking involves a fundamental shift in the way that humans interact with the environment. If humans want to thrive and develop, nature has to thrive and develop as well. So this is looking at, and what I really, really love this graph here as well, and this is looking at our conventional practices or our tiers of what we say of, building design within the built environment. So in the next slide, what I've detailed here, and this is something that I've done because there's a lot of green building programs out there. There's a lot of different things happening. It can be quite overwhelming, you know, and stuff like that, because they all fit into different spaces, they all have different benefits, they all have pros and cons, things they can do and they can't do, things they measure and don't measure. So within regenerative design, in this great graph, it's really benchmarking those standards and looking at the standards or the construction codes and practices that we should be using. I mean, we do have to use, you know, all of them. It's a bit of a tier. So, you know, if you're building a home, you have to go, or, you know, register it with BASICs. So, you know, the Building Sustainability Index rating, and then NatHERS sits under that. So, and that's the minimum compliance requirement you have to do to get your home. But, you know, if you're designing your home, something you're going to live in for 30 years, you know, or we're designing, or, you know, if we've got a whole estate, or it's a multi-residential apartment building, you know, like an aged care unit, and you've got 3 blocks and there's going to be 200, you know, people living in there, you know, we don't want to just be building things for minimum compliance. You know, for me, minimum compliance is, you know, one step away from breaking the law. We want to do better than that. You know, we should do better than that as well. Next step up from that is we've got, you know, green buildings or Green Star. So Green Star is awesome, and Green Star now is tracking towards, you know, is kind of tracking towards this, you know, this break even, this net zero carbon, you know, kind of approach as well. They're really pushing for that. And I think today there was a bit of a sneak preview at the Green Building Council of Australia about green homes for residential buildings. So at the moment, Green Star just looks at commercial and looks at a couple of things, railway stations even, but not like a residential dwelling. If I want to make my home better and I want to, you know, have a pathway for doing that, I can't use Green Star. But they are, you know, soon to release a tool that will, you know, release a new standard that will do that. And that will be huge. That'll be a bit of a game changer as well, because there's nothing really competing in that space besides Passive House, the Australian Passive House Association. So in this frame, Passive House is probably the only framework at the moment that's getting to us, or, you know, allows you to design a net zero carbon home off the bat, or, you know, really sets the precedence for what a net zero carbon home is. You know, which, you know, got a hell of a lot of insulation. It's got, you know, well sealed windows. It doesn't get condensation, doesn't get drafts. It's energy efficient. Everything is just sealed. It's just sealed to the max. And that's the whole thing of, you know, the whole idea about it. And it's really good, but, you know, don't tell the guys at, you know, Passive House Association that said this, but it's expensive. And it's kind of like you can't take bits of that standard. You'll have a, you know, certified passive house, or you don't. And you know, it's an awesome tool, but, you know, we need to have a bit of, we need to have some other tools, you know, that we can use as well. So hopefully the Green Star will get up there as well. But beyond that, the certification or the building frameworks that we do have, or the most that are going towards a regenerative, you know, influencing regenerative design and, you know, taking advantage, or, you know, leveraging off those regenerative practices, is the Living Building Challenge. So, you know, the SBRC is over here. I think it's over that way. I don't know what way I'm looking at the moment. That way. There you go. Total direction. The SBRC just recently got its Living Building Challenge certification, accreditation. And that was after years of, you know, what do you say, of monitoring, of adjusting, of, you know, improving, you know, its performance and everything like that. But it's not just its performance, it's in the design of the building as well. Like, I love going over there, and if you can get a, you know, have a tour, like, Robin's here tonight? Yeah. If you want to have a tour, just, you know, bug Robin over there. It's a fantastic building to, you know, getting inside like that. Because every part of it has a story, because all the materials, majority of the materials are being reused. You know, some are like, you know, being reused they're third generation materials. You know, you've got a brick that was used in a home, that was used in a building, that was used in this, and it's, you know, so again, it kind of has, it develops a character, a building that's been designed in line with the Living Building Challenge. So, and it's, you know, it's a hard criteria to get to, but I think as our building design, it creeps up this graph a little bit more towards more green. You know, we'll hopefully be able to see homes or communities and everything like that being designed in line with the Living Building Challenge. And then the ultimate one at the end, it's not so much a practice, it's a teaching method, is Regenesis, the Regenesis Institute. And it teaches people about, regenerative design, and, it's something that's, really, it's a really interesting course, and, if you want to look it up, if you want to become a regenerative practitioner, I definitely implore anybody, everybody to go and do it, because it's, at the core of it, it tries to get people to understand the First Nations people's understanding of that space, or the space that they're on, or the space they want to, the space they want to live on and be on. By having that, or having that First Nations understanding, connection to country, the meaning of the country, the history behind it, but also about the actual the climate conditions of that site as well. We're looking at using that knowledge to drive the built environment. So rather than having this tiered approach of, the built environment, then down, we have the ecology at the bottom. So, we just try to make minimal impact. It's completely the option to have ecology at the very top, and everything else has to fit within, not harming, but you've got to bolster the ecology and the environment around you. And so that's one thing I really, really like, because we need, I want to live in a building that, is designed for that. Live in a building that, bolsters the ecology and the environment around it as well. But also if you had a community, if you had a building, or a city that had that, it'd be, also be a fantastic city to live in. But ultimately, we're undoing the damage that we've done in the past couple of years from, carbon emitting and our dodgy building design. We're undoing that and trying to get back to the environment and trying to get back to the conditions before, before there was a built environment in that area.